Hey there, welcome to First Look. I'm outside, so come on a walk with me while I talk to you about important things. And this week is it's one of the most significant weeks that we have, at least from a liturgical standpoint. It's Palm Sunday, and at Northmont, what we've been doing for the last handful of years is celebrating and commemorating going from Palms to Passion. So we start off the morning with the Parade of Palms, and then we pivot. We come into the sanctuary, we sing, we tell some of that story, and then we move into the Passion story. And this year, we're using the Passion in Luke. So in case you want to pause along the way or follow along in whatever way makes sense for you, the Palm story will be the last half of Luke 19. And then the Passion story is a few chapters later. So Luke 22, 23, 24 in there. Depending on where you want to start. But I do want to mention before we move forward with this, just a couple of things that have happened, what we did just this past Sunday, and looking forward to what Holy Week looks like in general. So the first one was that we were very, very blessed to have Reverend Alec Kennedy, who has spent his retired years as a participant at Northmont, and did a wonderful sermon yesterday to kind of kick off our preacher series for our 100th anniversary. And the focus for Alec was on daily practice and what that means for how we live our faith out, and the kind of maturity and patience and consistency that it takes to do what it is that we do. And he used the phrase, sometimes Presbyterians are called the frozen chosen, and he talked about being thawed and flawed, and which I shamelessly stole and will do so again now. But with the intent of saying that, we can't treat ourselves or our faith like we're just sort of stuck in the past or stuck in our own ways, or just, that we've learned everything we need to learn. We need to be willing to continue to grow and continue to change, and at the same time recognize our need for that growth. And so, we spend our days, thinking about who we can be, and how we can better ourselves, and how we can continue to draw ourselves closer to Christ, which was a wonderful message, especially given the season. And so that moves us into this Palm and Passion Sunday. And so we're kind of nearing the end of this time together. And throughout this particular Lenten season, we've taken sort of each week to look at different ideas. What does it mean to be confronted with our own limitations? What does it mean to be confronted with our own need to be more compassionate? What is it? So just as you look back on the season, hopefully you found different things and places to sort of connect. So as we move into this particular week of Palm and Passion, I think one of the things I started thinking about, because we do all this all at once, is it kind of gives us this opportunity to look at the whole of the Holy Week story in one Sunday, and then we get to kind of do it in pieces throughout the rest of the week. Could be that you go to some other service during the week. It could be that you go to or participate in Monday, Thursday service, which our 319 partners are going to have. You can also participate in our Good Friday service, which will go over, some of those elements of trial and Jesus' death on a cross. So there's different ways into the story, but I think what I like about this is that it kind of gives us this broad overview of where it begins and where it ends, and then along the way in Holy Week we get to kind of see that in segments until we get to Easter. So starting with the palm story, I guess, I think I'm obviously outside, so I'm not going to read it to you, and I'm walking down this muddy path and trying not to slip in anything. So I'm not going to pause and read it for you, but that last several verses in chapter 19 is where we are in Luke for the palm portion of the service. And I think that the overarching idea, of course, in that portion of it is the hopefulness. That's the biggest element, I think, of Palm Sunday, is that you have all of these people gathered, and it's right before anything really happens, and they've given themselves kind of the permission, I guess, to see Jesus in a particular way, that sort of unspoiled or untested. They have known and seen him do miracles and be compassionate with the people and give wonderful sermons, heal people, confront the powers that be. And, and now, all there is are Hosanna and save us and we believe in you. And there's that piece of it. And I think one of the hardest things, of course, whenever you're talking about Palm Sunday, is to stay in that moment, because we know that so quickly we will be moved into what's hard about the story, what's hard about Holy Week. And that's what the service is kind of meant to do, is that it's supposed to be this very real representation of how quickly it moves from something so positive and hopeful to something that's hard and really grips us with the reality of our own sin, with the reality of the sin in the world, with the reality of our own brokenness. It's a very real part of the story. And it's hard not to think about your own life when it comes to those kinds of pivots. I've been kind of confronted over the last week or so with the realities of the world, the realities of different relationships in my life that start off one way and end a completely different way. And knowing that that's a part of life, it's still, I think, the element that you struggle with, because every time you enter into a new phase of life or a new relationship, you do go into it with a very similar kind of hope. We hope that this will make it better. We hope that this person will be the person that is either the friendship or the relationship or the job or the whatever that I need. I hope that I'll finally get the medical treatment that will make life better, or whatever it happens to be. And very often we realize that our hopes can be dashed, and sometimes that's just reality. Sometimes that's just what happens in life. But sometimes we have a vested interest in that. Sometimes the reason that things are the way they are is that is because of us. We didn't follow through, or we didn't make amends, or we didn't make it better, or we didn't work hard in the ways that we said that we would. And that's a difficult thing to get your mind around. And I think if there's a value to this time, at least for me right now, in every time you kind of deal with Lent, you're kind of thinking about it from a different perspective. I think the one for me this time has been, what do you do when you know that the reason you got here is because of you? Not because of someone else or something else, or, like I can blame the world, or I can blame those people or that person or whatever. But, what do you do when you're the problem? And, I think that's probably the element to this, the Holy Week, that I think we can look at from our perspective, because we realize, with 2,000 years of reflection, that of course we were the ones who did that to ourselves. We were the ones crying Hosanna, and then we were the ones crucifying him at the end of the week. And I think we can put ourselves in that place, and we can start to get a sense of our own shortcomings. And it's fascinating how time is what helps us to do that. That we're not as good at it in the moment. You might look around at your life right now and you think, well, whatever's hard, someone else is probably to blame. I think that we, of course, tend to think that way. But it's hard in the moment to get any kind of perspective on ourselves, I think, because, we are naturally defensive, and that's probably just it's probably a survival instinct on some level. But, to think about your own life and recognize the places where, what I said, or what I decided, or how I'm treating this person or that person, that's the reason why this went badly. We're not very good at. And, I think it's because we want to think of ourselves as winners, or we want to think of ourselves as victims, or we want to see ourselves as overcoming the obstacles that other people put in our way. Which also makes sense, because that's what most of our stories are about. Our stories, I was at a bookstore yesterday, and I was looking for some books, and, coming across stories that I could pick out, kids' stories. And so many of them are about children overcoming obstacles that are not their fault. Which, when you're 7 or 12 and you're dealing with some illness, or you're dealing with your parents getting divorced, or you're dealing with some poverty, or you're dealing with some abuse, or you're dealing with something like that, that's a really positive story to tell a child. you should tell children that story, right? They should be told that they can be resilient and that the things that are around them aren't their fault. Like, it's not your fault your parents got divorced. It's not your fault that someone passed away. It's not your fault that, whatever. And you can be strong, and life can get better, and you can find your own passions. And, those are good stories to tell kids. But when you're an adult, sometimes it is you. Now, I feel like I always need to have some kind of disclaimer. Sometimes it isn't. And the discernment between when it's your fault and when it's not, I think is obviously extraordinarily vital. All of us need to be able to gain some sort of idea and perspective of where other people have failed us. And that's when we start to rely on people that we can trust to tell us the truth about where we are. But we also need to be able to be honest with ourselves about our own shortcomings and our own hand in making things better. And that's how, we get into problems in a church, when we just assume that it's somebody else who made the mess. That's how we get in trouble in families. That's how we get in trouble in relationships. That's how we get in trouble in societies, in political systems or whatever. When we only see the other side as the problem, and we can never see any room for growth on our end, then that's where we get stuck. We need to be able to work together, but we also need to be able to see our own shortcomings. But when people do see their shortcomings, and this is one crucial element, if you have someone who's willing to say, I also fall short, I'm also not perfect, I also need help to make this work, then help them. Be willing to not just say, well, you should have been this or this or this. Put it down and try to be helpful. And I think that's one of the things I value so much about this time is, we spend these 40 days, if we're honest with ourselves, trying to get there. And then it ends in Easter with the resurrection story. But then it doesn't stop there. That's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the Bible. People then had to take that amazing story, that amazing reality, that amazing forgiveness, and then do the next thing. That's what I love about it. They still had a responsibility. They still had work to do. They still had a mission. And I think that's part of our responsibility as people of faith, is that we need to be constantly thinking about, how can I do the next thing? I can get stuck on, wanting to personally improve. And I've spent the last few years of my life trying to think about how I can be a better version of myself in lots of different types of ways. And sometimes, I've had some success in that. And then other ways, I've hit stumbling blocks, or I've hit places where it just feels like I don't know how to improve, or if I'm not improving fast enough, then I get down on myself about not improving fast enough. or taking a step back when I'm trying to take steps forward. But that's the journey that you try to be on. You try to improve, not just for yourself, but for other people around you. And that's what I think makes what we do in this season so amazing, is the intentionality of reflecting on that. One of the things I like, I don't know if you've ever done this or when the last time you've done this is, you ever walked a labyrinth? A labyrinth, sometimes they're permanent, like in stone. They're usually outside or maybe in a large indoor area. All you have to do is look up like labyrinth or religious ritual labyrinths. And you walk in this intricate pattern. And you're headed towards the center space, usually. And one of the things I love about walking a labyrinth, takes maybe 10 minutes, if you're doing it, at a slow pace and thinking as you go, is that you keep going in one direction and then the labyrinth takes you in another direction. You think you're getting close to where you're supposed to be trying to get to, and then you end up further away from it somehow. And then before you know it, you're there. And once you get to that goal, if you don't take time, then what you'll start doing is just trying to figure out, well, how do I get out? You spend all this time trying to get there, and then you breathe for a second, and then you're like, well, how do I get back to where I was? How did I get out of here? Because I want to be done. I want to be finished. I want this journey to be over with. And how you walk a labyrinth, I think, says a lot about, who you are or where you are in your life. And, sometimes you can take each little metaphor in walking that path to heart, and you can, really spend some time with it. And then other times you don't feel like you have time for that. I just want to get this over with. I just want to be done. This is taking too long. I don't know what the point of this is. And it's amazing to watch people do that for the first time. And it's usually like high school students or something like that I've had walk labyrinths. And some people are like, just sort of take it as another pointless exercise. And then, other people sit down and cry in the middle of it. Or, some other thing. And one's not necessarily better than the other, but you should be able to reflect on, well, why did I do that way? And if I don't value that exercise, what do I value? What am I willing to take time with? What am I not willing to take time with? It's amazing to me how I have people in my life who get so bogged down in reflecting on things that they never really get anywhere, and other people who have never done any reflecting at all on anything. They're just kind of walking through. It's hard. It's hard to know which to be when. And but I do think it's worth trying to understand why. There's a reason why people went from Hosanna to crucify him so fast. It says something about who we are that we do that. What we really rely on, what we don't, what we care about, who we don't. And, it can be one of those things, almost like anything else that we do in church. we just had communion yesterday. What I often say about communion is, this is just bread and juice we got from Shop and Save. And it can be that, because that's really all it is. Or it can be the moment that you need today to think about what's sacred about your life or what isn't, where you are or where you're not. It can make you think about gratitude. It can make you think about responsibility. It can make you think about promises. It can do a lot of things because it represents a lot of things. So this week is for you what you want it to be. And if what you decide is that it doesn't really mean a whole lot, then maybe that's just where you are right now. But maybe it's also an opportunity for you to do something that you don't normally do, which is contemplate something that more often than not you find too hard or too messy to look at. That can be it for you. But much like labyrinths, you have to choose how you want to walk it. So, whatever it means for you, whatever it feels like for you, wherever it takes you, I hope your journey in Holy Week and at the end of Lent is edifying, builds you up. And I hope you're different than you were before. Lots of things going on this week, in the next couple of weeks. If you need any help, let me know. Thank you for being you. Thanks for walking around here with me. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.